This weekend in Iceland, the parliament opened a new session. It began with a religious service, with Iceland's elected dignitaries and their spouses getting dressed all fancy and walking over to the cathedral. This is supposed to be sort of a smile, smile, wave, wave deal. But as you can see here in this video, picked up today by Jenny Jardin at boingboing.net, as you can see here, this was not your typical easy stroll over to the church for the lawmakers. Almost nothing is easy in Iceland anymore, not since the country's big banks collapsed 3 years ago in their little Icelandic corner of the global financial crisis. Those banks turned little Iceland into a giant, insane clown casino, a great big phony financial world power that went bust overnight. The whole country essentially busted. Your money's worth nothing and you're billions upon billions of dollars in debt, and nobody can quite explain why. If the U.S. was on the brink of a meltdown in 2008, Iceland sort of went over that brink. What we feared for ourselves pretty much happened to them. We're seeing here the latest protests of the rich guys who ruined Iceland and the government that let them. People throwing eggs, people throwing yogurt. It's Iceland. People, in one case, I think even throwing firewood at Icelandic officials. You see this person right here? That person right there is the First Lady of Iceland. She is the wife of the president. She's basically the Michelle Obama of Iceland. And look what she does at these protests. Watch her. She's with this group of politicians, but she turns away. See, oh, there she is. She's broken away from them. She leaves them doing their best to get to the church, and she kind of quick walks. It's like she's hoping her own handlers won't notice she's slipping away. And then she starts talking to and embracing the protesters. The First Lady of Iceland hot-foots it over to the barricades where the eggs and the yogurt and the firewood have been coming from people who have been suffering for 3 years now after this crisis. She walks over, she hugs them, and then she climbs over the barricade. And then in her fancy I'm the First Lady going to church suit, she climbs over the barricade and joins the people who had just been throwing stuff in her general direction. Across Europe, thousands of people have been marching against the bankers and the ruins of the global economy. In Italy last month, the biggest trade union shut down trains and buses and schools and government offices. They called a general strike over austerity measures by the Italian government, which is broke. One banker telling Italian TV the nation's economy is too big to fail and also too big to save. In Spain, protests in dozens of cities last week over banks evicting people who can't pay their mortgages. Unemployment there more than double the rate in the U.S. And the people of Spain have been turning out to say, no, you can't just throw us out of our houses because we can't find work, because frankly, there's no work to find. In New York City, the Occupy Wall Street movement entered its third week of protesting tax breaks for millionaires and a variety of austerity measures for the rest of Americans. Police this weekend arrested hundreds of Occupy Wall Street marchers on the Brooklyn Bridge. Hundreds of people arrested. Occupy Wall Street now showing signs of becoming Occupy everywhere in America. Occupy Boston, Occupy Chicago, Occupy Portland, Maine, Occupy Seattle. In Greece, riots continue over new austerity measures as that nation tries to arrange a bailout from the rest of the European Union. Greece learned just today that its recession will officially drag on for a fourth year. The government broken by corruption and the people suffering because of it. If you know anybody who works in banking or finance or global economics, you know any of those folks and they have seemed a little green around the gills lately? Maybe they've been ticking items off their bucket list or getting a little more religion than usual. It may be because they have looked up and realized that, yes, we survived falling off a cliff, but now that cliff is apparently subject to a landslide. The cliff is dissolving and heading right for where we are standing. In other words, the collapse of the American financial system that started at the end of the Bush presidency has been forestalled. As Michael Lewis puts it in his new book, Boomerang, it has been forestalled but not ended. As Mr. Lewis puts it, quote, the financial crisis of 2008 was suspended only because investors believed that governments could borrow whatever they needed to rescue their banks. What happened when the governments themselves ceased to be credible? This ongoing and potentially now worsening economic crisis of ours is global and it is political. It is also local and occasionally tawdry and weird. And one man who has gone to these tawdry and weird places around the globe trying to figure out what went wrong and why and how and who did it is back from his travels and is here. Joining us now in studio for the interview is Michael Lewis, the author of bestsellers and eventual Hollywood films Moneyball and The Blind Side. His latest book is called Boomerang, Travels in the New Third World, that is out today. Michael Lewis, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me back.
Do you believe that the sky is falling?
Yeah, it's more complicated than that. It is, I think what we're going through now is an extension of the financial crisis that began in 2007, 2008. That we have forestalled it, but what happened was these debts were created. They were private debts. They tended to be around the world nationalized, socialized, and the governments now are ceasing to be credible. And the question is, what happens when the governments aren't credible? Who can step in and say, we'll put the panic to rest? And I think, you know, I think we're coming to a point of reckoning. I don't think it's the end of the world, but I think we've got kind of radical change in front of us. Yes.
I have been following the Euro crisis as best I can and getting increasingly worried about it. I've been doing a lot more reading about it than you would think by how much we've talked about it, because I haven't quite figured out how to talk about it yet. But reading your book made me more scared than anything else that I have been reading, because it occurs to me that if you think that some things aren't too big to fail, then countries aren't too big to fail. But I don't understand what happens when countries fail.
Yes, well, neither do the people who run Europe. I mean, that's the question. The reason that Greece isn't just allowed to go, I mean, Greece can't afford to repay its debts. It will default in some way. It will not repay its creditors 100 cents on the dollar. The reason that the European Union is desperate to forestall that is that they don't know what happens when it happens. I mean, they do know that, for example, all the banks in Greece will be bankrupt because they own a lot of Greek government bonds. French banks and German banks are going to take big hits. And then it ripples through the financial system one more time. And all of a sudden, you know, the banking system is really an act of faith. People are willing to put capital into banks only if they kind of believe in them. They're black boxes largely to the investors who invested them. And if that faith starts to crumble, you get the Lehman Brothers like environment all over again. What was interesting to me, though, is it looks from 40,000 feet. It looks like the same story everywhere, but it's very different from country to country. I mean, this financial event has been a kind of window into local culture. You can see that it's a series of regional events, really, not just one event. That what happened in Greece was very different from what happened in Iceland, which was very different from what happened in Ireland, which is different from what happened here.
Is, though, the solution actually a best case, a sort of do you take a best practices solution and apply it to all countries? Do you say, you know what, Ireland, that was cute, and we realized that you got all excited about your housing. That was cute. And Iceland, that was cute about you thought that if you could just trade assets that had no value whatsoever and call them billion-dollar assets, that you could all end up being fake billionaires. That was cute. But you know what? You don't actually get to say how you restructure your financial system after it melts down. We figured out what the countries are that are resilient against things like this, and everybody's going to get a one-size-fits-all resilient financial system.
Yeah, but who's going to impose that? I mean, they got to impose it on themselves, right? There's no external authority that can come in and impose that, and it's very unclear that I mean, we've now moved from an economic question or a financial question to a political question. Which way are these people going to jump? Are the German people willing to bail out these countries on the periphery of Europe? The polls all say absolutely not, but their government, their leaders are trying to drag them into that relationship. The Greek people, for that matter, do they want to even be bailed out if the terms are that they've got to live in this endless austerity? Probably not. So I think what you got is the center not holding right now. But the cost of, I mean, what is going to ensue if Greece defaults and drops out of the euro is it's going to be ugly for a while. So everybody's doing their best to prevent it. The problem is it going to be
a run on banks throughout Europe if that happens? I mean, if people cease to believe that a euro-based economy can survive because it's a euro-based economy, does every euro-based economy suffer?
Well, yes. I think the question is, it isn't so much a run on banks, because I suspect what happens instantly is the governments say, we're behind the banks. You know, that once again, everything's too big to fail. Right. We're back to where we were. But then the question is, which governments can afford to bail out their banking systems? And we're in a very funny situation here. But as bad as our banks were, our banks are really small in relation to the rest of our economy compared to Europe. And so we can actually afford to bail out our banks. Germany can afford to bail out its banks. France, not so clear. Italy, definitely not so clear, and Spain neither. So you've got different situations, and the question is how the market's going to respond to the countries once they say, you know, you can't put our banks out of business. Well,
yeah, and once the full faith and credit of X country is rated as being something as what it's actually worth, rather than just an assertion of national sovereignty that we all defer to.
And what we're seeing is it's sort of the credit bubble is all about people ignoring risk. what's happening is people are now learning what risk is and learning to price it.
Michael Lewis, the new book is called Boomerang, Travels in the New Third World. Absolutely terrifying. Really, like, quite literally kept me up night grinding my teeth.
Hope it didn't bore you.
Oh, no, I don't grind my teeth for things that bore me. It was just upsetting, but important and beautifully written. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Thanks.